From July 10th to July 21st, 1925, the Scopes Monkey trial placed high school teacher John T. Scopes on trial for violating Tennessee's Butler Act, which banned the teaching of human evolution in public schools. Although the trial began as a test case over one state law, it quickly exposed a much deeper conflict over religious authority, modern science, and control of public education. The Scopes trial demonstrates that major changes in American society often provoke resistance before producing reform. While fundamentalists initially won in court, the trial sparked a national debate, revealed divisions within Christianity, and helped establish a precedent for later legal challenges that eventually expanded academic freedom and allowed evolution to become a central part of modern science education.
The Scopes trial was both a real legal case and a planned test case. It was a real courtroom trial with a real judge, lawyers, and conviction under Tennessee law. However, it was also intentionally organized as a test case by the American Civil Liberties Union, which wanted to challenge the constitutionality of the Butler Act.
The Butler Act was a 1925 Tennessee law that prevented public school teachers from dismissing the Book of Genesis account of humankind's origin. More importantly, it prevented the teachers from teaching the evolution of humans in place of the biblical accounts. The act was introduced the 21st of January, 1925, and passed the 28th. The Butler Act raised the legal question of whether public school instruction could include evolution, but it also reflected a broader struggle over state power, public education, and how Americans responded to modern scientific ideas.
The issue was not simply science versus religion. Instead, it revealed a major divide within American Christianity itself. Fundamentalist Protestants generally supported the law because they believed Genesis should be interpreted literally, while modernist Christians argued that religious faith and scientific discovery could coexist. The law therefore became part of a larger national debate over educational freedom, local control, and whether schools should adapt to modern knowledge. This resistance to new scientific ideas would define the trial and ultimately set the stage for the reform that followed.
Understanding who John Scopes was helps explain why this case became a flashpoint. He earned a degree at the University of Kentucky in 1924, with a major in law and a minor in geology. Scopes relocated to Dayton, Tennessee, where he became the Rhea County High School football coach and occasionally served as a substitute teacher. Scopes was charged on May 5, 1925, with violating the Butler Act. He was not a radical activist, he was an ordinary teacher, which made the case a powerful symbol of how far resistance to modern science was willing to go.
The trial had two legal teams, the defense for John Scopes and the prosecution supporting the Butler Act. The most famous clash was between defense attorney Clarence Darrow and prosecutor William Jennings Bryan, whose courtroom confrontation symbolized a larger national debate over modern science, biblical authority, and who should control what public schools teach.
The defense, led by Clarence Darrow, initially intended to argue that the Butler Act violated the teacher's right to academic freedom. This plan changed to promoting theistic evolution, which argued there was no conflict between creation and evolution. Judge John T. Ralston, who faced accusations of bias towards the prosecution, limited the defense's options significantly. He allowed only one of their 8 evolution experts, Maynard Metcalf, to testify in person, requiring the others to submit written statements. The trial peaked when Darrow gave a passionate speech, warning against inquisitions. He argued that the Bible should stay in the fields of theology and morality, not science.
On the 7th day of the trial, Darrow took an unusual step by calling prosecutor William Jennings Bryan to the stand as an expert witness on the Bible. During cross-examination, they focused on the literal interpretation of Genesis, discussing points like Cain's wife and Eve's rib. Darrow used these examples to argue that the Bible was not a fitting scientific text. The session became contentious, with Bryan accusing Darrow of trying to slur the Bible. Darrow countered that their goal was to prevent narrow-minded individuals from controlling education in the United States. The judge then abruptly adjourned the court. The trial wrapped up outside due to the oppressive heat. Judge Ralston suddenly cut short Darrow's 2-hour cross-examination of Bryan, ruling it irrelevant and ordering the testimony expunged from the record.
Aware that all defense evidence had been excluded, Darrow took a strategic approach by asking the jury for a guilty verdict without delivering a final summation. This tactic also stopped Bryan from giving his powerful, prepared closing arguments. In it, Bryan planned to warn that science without moral guidance endangered civilization, a view that captured exactly the kind of resistance the trial had come to represent. Science is a magnificent force, but it is not a teacher of morals. It can perfect machinery, but it adds no moral restraints to protect society from the misuse of the machine. In war, science has proven itself an evil genius. It has made war more terrible than it ever was before. If civilization is to be saved from the wreckage threatened by intelligence not consecrated by love, it must be saved by the moral code of the meek and lowly Nazarene. Bryan's words show that for many Americans, resistance to evolution was not simply ignorance, it was a deeply held fear that modern science would replace moral order. That fear drove the initial backlash, but it could not hold back reform forever.
After just 9 minutes of deliberation, the jury found John Scopes guilty and fined him $100. In his only statement, Scopes expressed that he felt convicted of violating an unjust statute and would continue opposing the law for the sake of academic freedom. Bryan died suddenly 5 days after the trial. In the short term, the Scopes trial did not create immediate reform, and this is exactly what makes it such a clear example of resistance preceding change. Scopes was convicted, and the Butler Act remained in force for decades, and anti-evolution activists were encouraged rather than defeated. At the same time, the trial's enormous media attention immediately transformed a local Tennessee law into a nationwide debate about censorship, religion, and public education.
The Scopes trial, popularly known as the Monkey Trial thanks to journalist H.L. Mencken, began as a local publicity stunt aimed at drawing attention and business to Dayton, Tennessee. It exceeded expectations, turning it into an international media event. Major newspapers, including the New York Times, gave it extensive coverage for days. Over 200 newspaper reporters from the US and London came, with Mencken's The Baltimore Sun contributing to the defense.
To meet the media demands, the town transformed temporarily. 22 telegraphers transmitted an astonishing 165,000 words daily, necessitating the installation of thousands of miles of telegraph wires. Additionally, the Scopes trial was historic as the first U.S. criminal trial ever broadcast on national radio by WGN in Chicago. The sheer scale of media coverage meant that even though fundamentalists won in court, the story of resistance to science was being broadcast to the entire country, planting the seeds of the reform that would eventually follow.
The Scopes trial revealed a major divide within American Christianity rather than a single religious reaction. Outside religious debates, scientists, journalists, civil libertarians, and many urban reformers saw the law as a form of censorship in public education. Even in Dayton, reactions were mixed. Some residents supported the law on religious grounds, while local business leaders promoted the trial for publicity and economic gain. Although Scopes was convicted, the anti-evolution movement did not end. By 1927, dozens of anti-evolution bills had been introduced in multiple states. This shows that the trial created both backlash and debate, making it an important example of how Americans often resist major social and scientific change before broader reform takes place.
The long-term significance of the Scopes trial was not its immediate verdict, but the legal and cultural precedent it helped establish. Although Scopes was found guilty, the case turned public school curriculum into a national issue tied to academic freedom, freedom of thought, and the relationship between church and state. However, the trial created a model for using the courts to challenge restrictions on what public schools could teach. That precedent helped lay the groundwork for later cases such as Epperson v. Arkansas, in which the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that laws banning the teaching of evolution violated the First Amendment.
The Scopes trial was not the end of anything. It was the beginning. In the summer of 1925, a small town in Tennessee put a school teacher on trial, and in doing so, put an entire nation's beliefs on trial with him. The guilty verdicts felt like a victory for those who feared what science might cost them, but history does not move in straight lines. The debate that began in that sweltering Dayton courtroom never stopped.
By 1968, the United States Supreme Court had ruled that laws like the Butler Act violated the First Amendment. Evolution was no longer banned from American classrooms, it was protected in them.
John Scopes was fined $100 for teaching the truth. It took 4 decades, but the truth won anyway. That is the real legacy of the Monkey Trial. Not the verdict, not the spectacle, not the headlines. It is proof that resistance to change, no matter how loud, no matter how certain of itself, cannot permanently hold back the tide of human knowledge. In American history, reform rarely arrives without a fight. The Scopes trial was that fight, and in the end, it was a fight that moved the country forward.